Pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations.
As people of faith, how do we face the issues of modern medical technology?
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion in life, produced by Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTBC TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Welcome to today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. We're glad you joined us. I'm Sandy Wilder, Public Relations Director at Houston Tillotson College. And today we have with us Chuck Meyer, who's Director of Pastoral Care at St. David's Hospital. And we'll be talking about, thank you Chuck for coming.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be talking about issues of medical technology, how we as people of faith ask and answer those questions that have to do with the beginning of life, the ending of life, and a variety of things that can happen in between. Chuck, would you tell us first a little bit about how you came to this particular position you have? What brought you here?
Pardon me, I've been at St. David's for about 14 years now, and before that I had been in correctional work in penitentiaries and jails. And over the 14 years at St. David's, I've seen vast changes, that's a relatively short time actually in terms of medical technology, and have seen the whole growth of the ethics movement, of people looking more carefully at end-of-life decisions, as well as at the way we do healthcare in this country, and we're of course in the midst of major change in that. So being a part of that process has caused me to reflect on how people make these decisions, how that relates to our faith, if it does, and to be real assertive about helping people to come to terms with this.
Now, we know that some questions have to do with the beginning of life, because birth is not as simple as it perhaps once used to be. It's the whole notion of assisted reproduction. Describe for us some of the issues involved in assisted reproduction and perhaps how one would go about asking and answering questions.
It's possible for a pre-embryo now to have 5 parents. You can have a genetic mother, a genetic father, a gestational mother, the one that carries it, a sociological mother, the one that raises it, and a sociological father. So we don't have names for these people yet. I mean, who are they? It makes Mother's Day very expensive. We don't know who to buy cards for. The problem is our medical technology has outpaced not only our ethical system, but also our vocabulary to talk about it. We don't have good words for these relationships yet. So it's causing a reevaluation of what a family is, what a parent is, what reproduction is. It raises all those issues and brings them to us to butt up against our faith beliefs.
So if you have, say, a couple or an individual perhaps come to you and begin talking with you about assisted reproduction issues, what are some of the questions that someone might be asking you as an ethicist?
I've had people come in and say, my faith group tells me that it's immoral to do this, that it's unnatural. That you should not use technology to assist reproduction, that's immoral. We really got to ask those questions about is something immoral because it's unnatural? I mean, if that were true, you wouldn't take aspirin, you wouldn't take over-the-counter medication, you would never go see a doctor, because all of that, in fact, is artificial intervention into what normally would occur, which might be disease or death. I've had people come in and say that for them, and this raises another interesting issue, it wasn't a moral issue, it was an economic issue. Because we seem to unfairly weight, W-E-I-G-H-T, weight our answers to problems in favor of medical technology. One couple came in and said that their clergy had told them that this was immoral, But for them, it was an economic decision. They were young, they were married 2-3 years, and they didn't have the $8,000 to $10,000 for adoption. But they did have the $1,000 or $2,000 co-payment because their insurance would pick up the rest of the in vitro fertilization, assisted reproduction. So there's no societal counterweight to that. So that the society, as a society, we seem to favor high-tech medical, technological approaches to disease, illness, or disability.
We must, since that field seems to be growing a good deal these days.
Sure does.
So then the question for those of us involved here in this discussion and folks listening in, as people of faith, how do we decide? What are some suggestions you would have for us as to how one decides if something is technologically possible? Is it morally or ethically the correct thing to do?
Right. One of the first things to look at is that just because we can do something doesn't mean we ought to do it. Now that is generally anti-Western and anti-American to believe that, because this whole culture was built on, if you can do it, you should do it. If you can build a railroad coast to coast, you ought to do it. If you can build skyscrapers, if you can put a person on the moon, you should do it. Well, our medical technology has advanced to the degree that we are now starting to ask, we can do a lot of things, should we do them? For me, the Bible is not a model for identity, but a mirror for who we are. We look to the Bible not to tell us what to do, not a model for morality, but a mirror for identity. Jim Sanders of Union Seminary used to say that all the time. Not a model for morality. We don't look to the Bible to tell us what to do specifically. There's not a lot in there about pre-embryos and cloning. But there is a lot in there about who we are. It is a mirror to look into to see who we are as people with one another and in our relationship with God. And that is the text that we bring to these decisions. And different people, through that dialogue, it really is a faith dialogue, will come to different conclusions.
And the role then that you play or the hospital plays is what? Simply to assist people in the discussion process?
It's a matter of process and dialogue. And my experience is that the more people discuss these issues ahead of time, if possible, the better the decisions are at the other end.
Are there some directives for beginning of life issues? We know, and we'll talk about later, directives for end of life issues, but are there some of those same things for the beginning
There
of
really
life?
are not that I know of.
Would you see that there is a need for that kind of thing, or is the situation so fluid still that we really can't as a people yet?
I think there's a need for discussion at all levels in faith communities about ethical issues. One of the things that a lot of us at St. David's do is go out and talk to churches and other groups, religious groups, about these ethical issues in detail and foster that kind of discussion, so that when, not if, but when people get in those situations, they'll have some memory and of the discussion to fall back on. And it at least helps to clarify the issues.
Okay, so you use the Bible as a guide, certainly for those who are Christian, and obviously sacred texts for people of other faiths too, as their background determines. What else would one use in this discussion?
Well, I think,
other resources?
Well, I think we use, certainly use scripture, tradition, sacraments, creeds. People come with that body of information. The thing that sort of cuts through everything is what's the most loving thing to do here? And that sort of cuts across religious boundaries, and also cuts through a lot of the scriptural variants, because I mean, you use scripture to argue anything. So the question that seems to be the bottom line here is, what's the most loving thing to do?
Okay. Have you, perhaps in your years of experience in this particular position, found that one faith group, one religious tradition has sort of thought things through better than some of the rest of us? Are there some models out there already?
Actually, the Catholic Church has been on the forefront of looking at ethical issues for a long time. Other denominations have as well, but particularly in the areas of death and dying, grief and bereavement, end-of-life decision-making. The Catholic Church, the Episcopal Church, the Methodist Church, Lutherans. There's been a lot of national publications dealing with those ethical issues, and they even have modules, kind of education modules for parishes.
I believe, if we've got our timing right now, we have some film to show you about one of the kinds of issues involved in human reproduction. So we'll come back to this discussion after this bit of tape.
Researchers at George Washington University Hospital have taken the first successful but controversial steps toward cloning a human being.
We are far away from actually being able to replicate embryos and grow healthy, normal embryos that could be implanted and actually go to terms.
Yet Dr. Jerry Hall did take 17 defective human embryos and cloned or duplicated, even triplicated them. Outside of his laboratory, though, scientists are worrying about the ethical impact. Who might use or perfect this technology, and why? For money? To create a master race?
The techniques of how we make our children, how we design our descendants, what we do to create the future generations to come are not matters just for doctors or scientists, they're matters for all of us.
Hall cautions that his was just a tiny step forward. Despite years of trying, the only species in which a cloned embryo has resulted in a live birth is the rabbit.
It would be mere speculation to assume that we could do it with humans. This type of research has been tried with mice and a few other species and has not been successful.
Still, once the ethical and scientific problems have been resolved, the scientists insist cloning could well help infertile women. How?
By improving the success rates, decreasing the costs, and decreasing the potential risks that go along with assisted reproduction.
But doctors are likening the debate over human cloning to the development of nuclear energy. It can be evil, a supremely destructive force, unless its use is properly regulated and well thought out. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, New York.
I wouldn't wonder but what that clip raises more questions than it answers. Chuck, one of the things that the tape suggested is that once the ethical and moral issues are resolved, and then it went on, what's your sense of those issues being resolved?
It will take a lot of discussion, a lot of dialogue, a lot more data before they're thoroughly resolved. That part of the problem is kind of lag time. New techniques come out, and then the society as a whole discusses them and decides whether or not these are compatible with what we believe as a culture. There's nothing inherently evil about technology, as with anything else. It's how we use that. The seductiveness of it, however, is that the stories like the clip that you just showed tend to reinforce the idea that technology will save us, and especially from death. It will save us from disability, it will save us from illness, it will save us from death. And so technology then becomes the thing that people expect will ultimately pull them out. Well, they get real disappointed when that doesn't occur, and doctors often take the flack for this. You know, you're supposed to cure me of this. I see this on TV all the time. You know, somebody comes in with some rare, strange disease, and some miraculous cure appears, or technology is able to do it. And in fact, the limits of technology are much underrated.
I think you're absolutely right, but fortunately the limits of our discussion aren't reached yet.
Right.
We'll take a break here to show you a little bit more about Austin Faith Dialogue, and we'll come back talking with Chuck Meyer today.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
We're continuing our conversation today with Chuck Meyer, who's Director of Pastoral Care at St. David's Hospital. In the first part of the show, we talked about issues relating to the beginning of life, assisted reproduction, and all the questions and issues that come with that. Now let's turn and talk about issues related to the end of life and how we consider, as people of faith, the whole experience of dying. There are things like the limiting of treatment, prolonging dying itself, advanced directives, and of course whether medical technology is ethically obligatory in situations and how one decides that. Chuck, I know the hospital has put together some resources to help people answer and ask those questions. What is it you brought today that you can talk about?
The Patient Self-Determination Act was passed in November of 1991, so that beginning of 1992, it is a federal mandate that all healthcare institutions, anybody dealing with Medicare, Medicaid, is required now to inform incoming patients, residents, whoever, of what their healthcare rights are. So we at St. David's have developed this brochure called Critical Choices, actually in two forms, kind of a short form, your 1040, and a longer form that has the advanced directives in it. As a way to help patients and families pardon me, begin to discuss these issues. We talk about what their health care rights are. You have a right to refuse treatment. You do not have to be here. You have a right to a living will, durable power of attorney. You have a right to express a concern concerning the hospital or your health care giver or your physician. You have a right to participate in your health care decisions. You have a right to know your diagnosis. You have a right to know the cost of treatment. We also talk then about our resuscitation categories. Anybody checking in obviously is initially considered a Category 1, which is a full support, total support. Resuscitation category tells us what to do if you start to die. We have 3 categories, and I can talk about those if you want. But it tells what our policies and procedures are and how people can talk about these issues, and lists people that they can call for help in the hospital: pastoral care, social services, patient representative. Your viewers need to know there are support people in every hospital in town and nursing home as well that are happy to discuss these issues. We're well trained in this. We do this a lot. There are no right or wrong answers in any of this, which is also real important to remember. And we will help you figure out what the right thing is to do for you and your loved one.
So that these are pamphlets then that someone gets when they come to a hospital, but I get the sense that you would also encourage people to get copies, to hold discussions, whatever, ahead of time.
We do a lot of, at St. David's, we do a lot of public speaking in churches around town, as I mentioned, talking to people about these issues, because as you and I have talked about earlier, the time to discuss this is not when one of you is on a respirator and can't say anything. The time to talk about these issues is now, while we're relatively lucid and can say what we think our wishes would be. It's not easy generally to talk about. These are life and death issues. But not to talk about them means that you relegate that decision-making to somebody who may not have any idea what your wishes are. So it's real important, I think, to be able to say what you would want done. Part of the problem with that, I was talking to a group in Rollingwood the other night. They said, well, you know, but we don't know what all the options are. Well, that's true. You don't know about respirators and nutrition, hydration, and antibiotics, and when it's okay to withdraw all of those, and what all the technology actually is. Most people don't know what they're asking when they say, I want everything done.
Everything then sounds like it doesn't always include some kind of fancy equipment or some kind of elaborate procedure. You mentioned nutrition and hydration.
Right. These, we get into terminology and language here, and it's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, with assisted reproduction, we have terminology problems, we have language problems. And again, it's not because, it's like Ross Perot said, no villains out there. Nobody is purposely lying to people, but we're using old images and old words to describe new technology. And it not only does not fit, but it doesn't really say what it is that we're doing. For instance, nutrition and hydration. I never use the words food and water with families. It is not a feeding tube. Unless you think you can get an enchilada down that sucker, which is very difficult to do. Because when people in healthcare use terms like food, family members are thinking food here. And the images that come into their head are lunch, dinner, warm, nurturing, family occasions, sitting down and talking over dessert. So of course you wouldn't take somebody's food away. But you might remove, if you knew the truth, artificial nutrition being force pumped by a machine into a body to keep a body functioning and stay alive. I never use the words life support with people for the same reason. Because to say that conveys to them that what we think we're doing in there is supporting life. Well, people throw the word life around like everybody knows what it means. I don't know what it means until I know what life meant to this patient in the bed. And is this it? Is this the quality of life that this patient desires, or can we restore it? And if not, then we need to ask the next question, what are we doing here? And are we, in fact, honoring their life and honoring their wish by maintaining artificial nutrition or hydration? Another just quick term here is starving to death. I hear this all the time. Well, we can't remove the nutrition because mother will starve to death. The truth is, it takes a lot of time to starve to death. You usually dehydrate first. And that's the way people used to die in this country, with a condition called azotemia. Malnutrition, dehydration, go into a coma, kind of go to sleep and die. One of the things that dying people do is not get hungry. They don't eat. So when you stop taking food orally, again, assuming the patient's in a terminal condition, then you got to ask, why are we doing this?
Suggesting that it may be a natural process then, as the body is...
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
That not eating is
right.
to be expected.
And then the goal becomes comfort.
Okay.
We change the goal from cure to comfort. And we never stop treating people. I hear this all the time. You mean you're going to stop treatment? We never stop treating people. It's a hospital. We never stop treatment. We change the goal of treatment. We change it from curative to palliative, from aggressive to comfort.
What differences do you see in questions that might come up with a younger person facing death versus an older person facing death? Are there different questions that a family would weigh, and might the decisions be made in a different sort of way?
See, I would argue that to ask that question is ageism. Because it makes no difference to me whether it's a neonate, a teenager, a 30-year-old, or a 91-year-old. The question is, are they in a terminal condition? Is this patient going to die without the intervention of artificial sustenance in some way? That's the really bottom line question. I hear this all the time, of course. Somebody will be coming in with EMS, and the first question everybody asks is, well, how old is he? What difference does that make? The question is he dying? What condition is he in?
Right.
And even more importantly, what were this patient's wishes about this? Did we know? Did they have a living will, a durable power of attorney for health care? Did they have any of these documents, or did they ever talk to you, their parent, or their child, or their spouse, or significant other, about what their wishes were?
And what do you find that various faith groups, various denominations and religious traditions have to say about the end of life? So where are we in that discussion?
It's very interesting. Almost universally, I hear the caution about using technology inappropriately. The whole issue of whether or not respirator, artificial nutrition, hydration, antibiotics, chemotherapy, radiation, whether any of these are ethically required at the end of life. And almost universally, I hear faith groups saying, no, they are not.
You hear the faith groups saying this,
right.
and yet there's a great deal of discussion on the part of family members.
Sure.
So what else is influencing their decisions?
We don't want people to die. It's our unwillingness to believe the statistics. And the primary statistic is The death rate on this planet is 100%. 1 out of 1 dies. We're all going to do that. And the question is not, am I going to die? It's a silly question. The question is, how am I going to die? And the question in this country is, in what state of indignity must I die? 80% of deaths in this country occur in healthcare institutions. That means you and I and all your viewers out there stand an 80% chance that our death will be decisional, managed, directed. Not accidental and not natural. It's real hard to die naturally. You can do it. Just got to not tell anybody you're going to do this.
Okay, let me ask you then briefly, you've got just a little bit more time. If you were going to set up an ideal forum to discuss end-of-life issues, what would that forum look like?
Church.
A local church,
Yeah, local parishes. There ought to be lots of discussion at the local parish level or congregational level, depending on your denomination or faith group. There ought to be lots of discussion at that level. Have somebody come in and talk about what the options are and talk about the ethical implications of maintaining, or the medical implications. Sometimes maintaining artificial nutrition and hydration can actually make pain worse. And withdrawing it can actually ease pain. And if the goal is comfort, then everything needs to be aimed at the comfort goal. So have people come in. One of the things I've seen the last couple of years is a lot of parishes and faith groups are bringing in panels. They'll bring in myself, one of the rest of us from St. David's, a doctor, an attorney, a family member, and talk about these issues, have advance directives available in the parish. Why not have them available there? Your viewers can get those free. Call me at St. David's. I'll be glad to send them out to you. Any hospital in town has them. Texas Medical Association has them for free. They're real important to have, and to have this discussion before you get into the situation.
Right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot still to talk about, because as we who've listened in today know, these issues aren't going to go away. They're not going to get any less complicated. And as Chuck suggests, though, there is a very high probability that we can begin to understand and can begin to know what we and our families want if we talk in our faith settings, if we talk with one another as people of faith in our churches, in our congregations. It's good for us because most of us watching are probably folks who are either struggling with or will struggle with those same questions. We're glad you joined us this morning to help us begin to understand the whole issue. Thank you, Chuck. And we hope that all of you will join us for the next edition of Austin Faith Dialogue, truly a place where we as people of faith can talk about today's issues and the faith that sustains us through them. Thank you for joining us for Austin Faith Dialogue. We'll see you next week.
Information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.